The river was swollen but deceptively calm, its brown surface gleaming under the mid-morning sun like the hide of some ancient beast. Cottonwoods leaned over the bank, their roots tangled and gnawed by the current, and the meadow beyond smelled of damp grass and horse sweat. A lone rider reined in at the edge, boots dusty, hat pulled low, a man who preferred watching over speaking. Wyatt Calder had never come here for anything but water, yet today the river asked something more from him. She was already in the water. Her skirts clung to her thighs, heavy with mud, the hem dragging her downward. Margaret Rosewood was no more than 22. Her face pale against the glare, but her eyes carried the wild brightness of someone who had fought too long to surrender. At her side clung two little girls, daughters no taller than his saddle, both with braids undone and cheeks streaked with tears. They clutched at her dress as if their hands could anchor her against the pull. Wyatt swung down from his horse before he thought to question it. His boots slipped in the sodden earth, knees sinking as he edged closer to the bank. The water lapped only a yard away, deceptively slow at the surface while beneath it pulled with invisible teeth. He called out, though his voice was rough from disuse. "Hold steady. You'll lose your footing if you fight it." Margaret turned her head, wet hair plastered across her cheek, and for a fleeting moment he saw her as she must have been before, sunlit, proud, stubborn. She shook her head, coughing against the spray, and her voice carried clear and sharp over the current. "Take care of my children, and my ranch will be yours." The words landed like a shot in Wyatt's chest. For a heartbeat he thought he had misheard. No one barters children, not in daylight, not with strangers. But her eyes, fierce and unyielding, told him she meant it. The girls cried out, clinging tighter, their tiny fists wrapped in the fabric of her bodice. Wyatt edged nearer, boots sliding, and reached a hand toward them, fingers trembling despite his practiced calm. He had faced storms and cattle stampedes, gunsmoke and loneliness, but never the raw terror of two children's lives dangling from a promise he hadn't yet agreed to. "Ma'am," he rasped, "don't speak like that. Reach for me. I can pull you in." She smiled then, a strange, sorrowful tilt of her mouth, as if she knew the river would take her no matter what he said. "A bargain, Cowboy. Swear it." The current surged, jerking her sideways. One daughter slipped, shrieking, and Wyatt lunged forward, catching her wrist with a grip iron-tight. The little girl's body was all bones and trembling. He hauled her against his chest, mud spattering his shirt. The other twin still clung to her mother, sobbing into her skirts. Wyatt reached again, straining, his boots half in the water now, but the river caught Margaret full in the waist, wrenching her loose. She gave one sharp cry, not of fear but of command. "Promise them, Calder. Promise." Then she was gone, swept under the churn of brown froth, her hand vanishing like a candle snuffed in wind. The girl left behind wailed, clawing at the air where her mother had been. Wyatt seized her before she pitched forward into the current, dragging both children onto the muddy bank. He collapsed to his knees, arms tight around their small frames, chest heaving as if he himself had nearly drowned. His horse shied nearby, the reins trailing, but Wyatt did not rise. The girls clung to him, sobbing into his coat. Their hair smelled of river water and fear, their bodies shaking with a grief too vast for such small bones. He could not speak. His tongue felt weighted with stones. For long minutes there was only the roar of the current and the broken cries of the children. Sunlight glittered on the water as if mocking the loss it had swallowed. Wyatt lifted his gaze, scanning the river's course, but there was no trace of her. Only reeds bowing in the eddies, only the silence that follows when heaven refuses to answer. At last the older twin, her cheeks streaked with dirt, tipped her head back to look at him. Her eyes were too wide, too old for 4 years. She whispered in a voice frayed thin, "Mr. Mama said you'll take us home now, right?" Wyatt stared at her, his breath unsteady. He was a drifter, a man with no claim but his own shadow, a man who had failed before and chosen solitude as punishment. Yet here, on this muddy riverbank, two trembling souls looked to him as if he were all they had left in the world. The promise still rang in his ears, sharp as iron. "Take care of my children, and my ranch will be yours." He tightened his arms around the girls, the weight of them fierce and fragile against his chest. The river rushed on, indifferent, carrying its secret downstream. Wyatt Calder closed his eyes. In the hollow between one breath and the next, he knew the river had bargained true, and the debt was his now. The road into town shimmered with heat, though the season was not summer. Dust rose in little swirls with each step, settling on faces too young for such weariness. Wyatt Calder walked with one girl perched on his hip and the other gripping his calloused hand. Their small boots scuffed against the earth, and now and again the younger one stumbled, tugging hard at his sleeve. He slowed without thought, matching their fragile pace, though each mile stretched heavier with the silence that trailed them. The horse plodded behind, reins looped loose, carrying nothing but the memory of what had been lost at the riverbank. Wyatt kept his eyes forward, though the image of Margaret's hand vanishing beneath the current refused to fade. A promise had been made, and the weight of it pressed against his ribs harder than the girl's small hands ever could. They crested a rise where the road bent through cottonwoods, and the outline of the town shimmered in the distance. Smoke curled from chimneys, a steeple caught the light, and the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer carried on the wind. The girls looked up as if the sound itself promised safety. But Wyatt knew better. Townsfolk did not welcome drifters with children at their side. As they entered the main street, faces turned. Women in calico dresses paused at wash lines, men leaned on hitching posts, whispers trailing in their wake. Wyatt heard enough to know their judgment. That drifter can't raise young-uns. Her ranch'll go to ruin now. Best send the girls to kin, if any can be found. The words pricked, but Wyatt kept his jaw tight. The girls pressed closer, sensing the weight of stares. One buried her face in his shirt, muffling her sobs, while the other held his hand with desperate strength. He wanted to shield them, but he had nothing but his body and silence. Near the livery stood the preacher, Reverend Amos Harlan, thin as a fence rail, his Bible tucked beneath his arm. His voice carried low but steady as Wyatt passed. "Pure religion," the man quoted softly, "is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world." Wyatt met his gaze for the briefest moment. There was no accusation there, only a quiet urging, like a lantern left burning in the night. Still, Wyatt said nothing. Words had never been his strength. By dusk he had found no roof that would take them in, only suspicion or pity that cut like knives. So he led the girls beyond town, to where a stand of cottonwoods offered meager shelter. There, he built a fire with careful hands while the twins huddled close together, their dresses damp and stiff from the river. The flames painted their faces gold, streaked with dirt and tears. One whimpered about the dark. Wyatt pulled his blanket from the saddlebag and wrapped it around both, tucking the edges clumsily but firm. They leaned into each other, small shoulders pressed tight, eyes glinting with the reflection of flame. After a while, one girl asked in a small voice, "Mister, do you know how Mama braided our hair?" His throat tightened. He had watched women braid before, at campfires, at church picnics, but his hands were made for rope and reins, not ribbons. Yet he knelt, awkwardly dividing the tangles, fumbling through the motions. His fingers lacked grace, but the child sat still, closing her eyes as though the attempt itself brought comfort. When the braid hung crooked but complete, she touched it gently, a ghost of a smile flickering. "Looks like Mama's," she whispered, though they both knew it did not. Wyatt only nodded, swallowing hard. As night deepened, he leaned back against his saddle, the children curled beside him beneath the blanket. The fire crackled low, and his mind wandered to the woman he had once failed. Long ago, a sweetheart who had chosen another rather than wait for a man who carried nothing but silence. He had told himself since then that he was not meant for hearth or home. Yet here he was, two girls breathing soft against his side, trusting him without question. The stars opened wide above, merciless and beautiful. Wyatt stared at them until his eyes blurred, listening to the faint sounds of crickets and the restless shifting of the horse. Every choice he had made until now had led to solitude, yet Margaret's last plea bound him tighter than any rope. Near midnight, the younger twin stirred in sleep, mumbling words that sliced through him more sharply than any accusation. "Don't leave us like Mama." Wyatt sat rigid, the fire crackling low, the night pressing close. He knew sleep would not find him. The girls trusted him as if trust alone could anchor a drifting man. And though his heart rebelled against it, He felt the weight of belonging settle upon him like a cloak he had never expected to wear. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and rain, a reminder that the world turned regardless of promises. Wyatt gazed into the darkness beyond the firelight, where the road stretched unseen, and wondered if he was strong enough to walk it. When dawn came, it would bring choice and consequence. For now, he held the girls close and let the silence answer for him. The road bent westward, carrying them across open prairie until the land began to change. Fences leaned like tired sentries, boards splintered, nails rusting. A barn sagged against the horizon, its roof missing shingles, doors hanging ajar. Beyond it, the house sat square against the rising light, windows staring blank as eyes that had wept too long. This was Margaret Rosewood's ranch, and it breathed the silence of a place left waiting. The girls ran ahead, their braids bouncing, skirts flaring in the wind. They shouted their mother's name, as if she might answer from the doorway. Only the echo of their voices returned. Wyatt Calder followed slower, each step heavier, the promise pressing deeper. He had expected ruin, but not this ache of abandonment, the sense that the land itself mourned its mistress. At the porch, weeds curled through cracks between boards. One girl picked up a shawl half buried in dust, holding it close to her face. The other pushed open the door, hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and lavender gone stale. A chair lay toppled, a teacup shattered near the hearth. Life had ended here too suddenly, as though Margaret had meant to return before the river claimed her. Wyatt set their few belongings near the door. He stood awkward, hat in hand, unsure if he was intruder or guardian. The girls explored, their laughter thin and uncertain, as if testing whether joy was still permitted. In the barn, horses stamped nervously, uncurried and forgotten. Tools lay scattered, fences broken, the fields beginning to surrender to weeds. While the girls played with a rooster that strutted defiantly in the yard, Wyatt picked up a hammer and set to work. He nailed loose boards on the porch, mended a hinge, swept dirt from the threshold. His hands moved with muscle memory, though his heart lagged behind. Each strike of the hammer echoed the bargain he had not spoken aloud yet could not deny. By afternoon, the sun burned hot, and the girls brought him a dented pail of water from the well. They giggled when he splashed his face, cooling the dust, their laughter filling the empty yard with something alive. For the briefest moment, he let himself believe the ranch could breathe again. The illusion broke when a rider appeared on the ridge. Dust rose around the horse's hooves, and soon a man approached, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp beneath the brim of a black hat. Edgar Pike, a rancher with too much land and too little mercy, reined in at the gate. His voice carried like gravel dragged across stone. "So it's true," Pike drawled. The Drifters set himself up at Rosewood Land. Wyatt straightened but did not step forward. The girls shrank behind him, clutching his legs. Pike spat into the dirt, lip curling. "Her kin's gone. No one to claim it but neighbors. You've no right here, Calder. Folks say you're after her ground, not her children." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He wanted no fight, but his silence gave Pike the words he feared most. "Thought so," the man sneered. "You'll bleed this place dry, same as you did every camp you wandered through. Best pack up before someone makes you." He wheeled his horse and rode off, leaving dust in his wake. Wyatt stood long in the quiet, the hammer still heavy in his hand. The girls looked up at him, eyes wide with questions they did not voice. He knelt, drawing them close, though he could offer no promise beyond the one already etched into his chest. As evening fell, he lit a lantern in the kitchen. The girls set the table with care, placing 3 plates as if expecting their mother to join. One whispered, "She'll be back," and the other nodded fiercely, eyes shining with stubborn hope. Wyatt could not bring himself to correct them. He only sat with them, spooning out beans, letting their chatter fill the hollow space. Later, when the girls slept curled together on the bed they once shared with their mother, Wyatt stood by the window. The moon washed the ranch in silver, every broken fence and sagging beam stark against the night. He knew the town would side with Pike. They would see a drifter, not a keeper. Yet the memory of Margaret's last cry bound him more than law or gossip. His gaze fell to the shawl draped across a chair, its fabric worn but faintly scented of lavender. The girls had placed it there carefully, as if saving a place for their mother's return. Wyatt reached out, fingers brushing the cloth, and a chill ran through him. The ranch was not just wood and earth. It was haunted by absence, aching for belonging. And he, a man who had never called anywhere home, now stood as its unlikely keeper. Behind him, one girl stirred in her sleep, whispering through a dream. Wyatt leaned closer, straining to catch the words. "Don't let him take it, Pa." The title struck him harder than any blow. He froze, the lantern flickering, his breath caught between denial and something far more dangerous, hope. The storm came without warning, sweeping in from the west with a growl of thunder that rattled the loose panes of the ranch house. Rain lashed against the roof, pouring through cracks Wyatt had not yet mended. He moved quickly, shifting buckets beneath the drips, while the girls huddled beneath a quilt, wide-eyed at the violence outside. The air smelled of wet earth and fear, and the wind keened through the eaves like some mournful spirit. When lightning split the sky, the barn door slammed open against its frame. Wyatt lunged into the storm, boots sinking deep in the mud, and wrestled the latch closed with rain soaking him through. He could hear the cattle bawling in panic, hooves striking the stalls. He calmed them with rough hands and low murmurs, his voice steady even as thunder cracked above. By the time he staggered back inside, water streamed from his hair, dripping down his shirt in rivulets. The girls looked at him as though he were carved from stone, yet their eyes betrayed the tremor of trust that he would stand no matter what the storm demanded. When the worst had passed, they sat near the hearth, fire sputtering as damp logs hissed. Wyatt stripped off his soaked coat, spreading it to dry, while the girls leaned against him, their hair smelling of wood smoke and lavender soap from a bar Margaret had left behind. They asked for a story, not about outlaws or heroes, but about their mother. Wyatt hesitated, then spoke quietly of the way she had once ridden side-saddle across the meadow, laughter scattering birds into flight. His voice softened until the room itself seemed to lean closer, listening. The knock at the door came sudden, breaking the fragile calm. Wyatt rose, hand instinctively brushing the revolver at his hip, though he hoped not to use it. When he opened the door, rain dripped from the brim of Edgar Pike's hat. The man stepped inside without invitation, his presence souring the room. "You're living on borrowed ground," Pike said, eyes narrowing on the children by the fire. "This land's too much for a drifter. Better hand it over before it breaks you, and them." Wyatt stood still, shoulders squared, the firelight etching shadows across his face. He had never been a man for speeches, but silence itself carried weight. Pike sneered, mistaking it for weakness. "You think Rosewood's promise makes it yours? The law won't see it that way. Folks won't either." His gaze lingered on the girls, cold and calculating. Best not let them get too attached. A soft voice cut through before Wyatt could answer. The older twin, clutching the edge of the quilt, said, "Mama told him. He's ours now." Her words hung in the air, fragile as glass yet unbreakable. Pike's mouth twisted, but the fire cracked loud, drowning any reply. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy and left, rain swallowing him back into the night. Wyatt sat down slowly, his pulse thundering harder than the storm. The girls pressed against him, seeking warmth, seeking reassurance. He did not tell them how close they were to losing all of it. Instead, he stoked the fire, flames rising, throwing light on faces that trusted him more than he trusted himself. Days after, town talk grew sharper. At the church one Sunday, Wyatt felt the eyes of every soul upon him as he entered with the girls. Some nodded kindly, others whispered behind gloved hands. After the hymn, Reverend Harlan spoke with quiet authority. "A man's worth is not weighed by blood nor land, but by the promises he keeps." Wyatt bowed his head, the words burning like scripture carved onto his ribs. The girls sat straighter beside him, their small hands folded tight, as if the preacher's words stitched them closer together. That evening, back at the ranch, Wyatt lit the lamp and combed the girls' hair by firelight. His hands were clumsy, his patience tested by tangles, but he persisted. They giggled at his mistakes, their laughter ringing against the rafters. For the first time, he smiled without restraint, the expression tugging awkwardly at a face unused to joy. Yet even as warmth settled into the room, the wind rattled the shutters like a reminder. The ranch was no longer simply Margaret's, It was contested ground, a place where ghosts lingered and enemies circled. Wyatt knew Edgar Pike would return, not with words alone. When the girls finally drifted to sleep, their heads resting on each other's shoulders, Wyatt sat long at the table, staring into the dying fire. The shawl lay across the chair where they had placed it, as if Margaret herself might walk in and claim it. His hand hovered above the fabric, trembling with something he dared not name. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the night hushed and heavy. Wyatt rose, checked the lock on the door, and leaned his back against it, the revolver cold at his side. He whispered into the silence, though no one could hear, "It ain't the land that binds me here, it's the promise I gave." From the shadows beyond the window, a figure watched. Edgar Pike astride his horse, unmoving, the ember of a cigar glowing faint against the dark. He turned his mount slowly, vanishing into the distance, but the message was clear. The storm inside the walls had ended. The storm outside had only begun. Spring thaw swelled the river again, its voice louder than before, churning with a memory of all it had taken. Wyatt Calder stood with the girls at the bank, their small hands folded into his, their faces pale with remembrance. The current rolled dark and merciless, carrying branches and debris like bones in a restless tide. It had been months since Margaret Rosewood vanished beneath that water, yet the wound remained open, bleeding into every silence. The twins clung closer, skirts brushing mud, eyes wide with fear and stubborn hope. "Is Mama watching?" the younger asked, her voice no more than a tremor. Wyatt's gaze held the river, his jaw tight. He wanted to lie, to soothe, but honesty pressed sharper. "She's watching," he said softly, and though he could not prove it, the words steadied the children. They leaned into him, believing because belief was all they had. Behind them, hooves struck the earth. Edgar Pike rode up, flanked by two hired men, their faces hidden beneath hats pulled low. Pike's smirk gleamed like a knife. "Flood'll wipe this place clean," he said, jerking his chin toward the rising waters. "No sense holding ground that won't stand. Hand it over, Calder. Spare the little ones the hurt of watching you drown with it." Wyatt shifted the girls behind him, his body a barrier. His voice came low, steady as the current. "This land was hers. It's theirs now. I'll not yield." Pike spat into the mud, eyes glinting. "A drifter with no blood ties don't make a father. Law won't see it, and neither will I." One of the twins slipped past Wyatt's leg and walked forward, trembling but unafraid. She looked up at Pike, her voice breaking but clear. "Mama said it's ours. And he's ours too." Silence fell. Even the river seemed to pause. Pike's sneer faltered, his gaze flicking from the child's steady eyes to the man who stood over her. Shame crept into his face, though pride fought to bury it. He pulled his reins sharply, turning his horse away. His men followed without a word, leaving only hoofprints pressed deep into the sodden ground. Wyatt exhaled slowly, his chest heavy with both relief and sorrow. He gathered the girls close, their courage having spoken what he could not. Together they turned back toward the house, the river roaring behind them like a beast denied. That night, the town gathered at the church, news of Pike's retreat spreading faster than rain. Wyatt stood in the back, the twins gripping his hands, their braids neat from his clumsy care. Whispers swirled, some doubting, some approving, but when Reverend Harlan rose, the room hushed. "A man's worth," the preacher intoned, "ain't measured by cattle nor coin, but by the keeping of promises. And a home," he added, his gaze falling to the children, "isn't built by walls alone, but by love steadfast as stone." Wyatt felt the words strike deep, as if Margaret herself had spoken them through Scripture. The twins looked up at him, faces aglow with trust, and something long dormant inside him began to breathe. Later, back at the ranch, rain still drizzled, dripping from the eaves. Wyatt lit a lantern on the wooden table, its glow spreading warmth across the room. The girls fetched tin plates, setting 3 with practiced care. Then, without a word, they set a 4th, draping their mother's shawl across the chair as if inviting her spirit to supper. Wyatt froze, watching the gesture. His throat tightened. He poured beans into bowls, his hand steady though his heart swelled until it hurt. The girls bowed their heads to pray, voices small but certain, "Thank you for Mama, and thank you for him." The fire crackled. Rain softened against the roof. Wyatt looked at their faces, their laughter breaking through grief like sunlight through cloud, and for the first time he allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. When the girls had gone to bed, curled together beneath the quilt, Wyatt sat alone at the table. He traced the edge of the shawl with his fingertips, its fabric frayed but still holding the faintest scent of lavender. Outside, the river roared on, but inside, the house held something stronger, something the water could not take. He leaned back, letting the silence settle, and whispered into the night, "I promised, Margaret, and I'll keep it." Through the window, moonlight spilled across the ranch, silvering the fields, the fences, the house reborn from sorrow. Wyatt knew storms would come again, that the world would test every fragile thread they had woven. But he also knew this: he was no longer a drifter. He belonged to the land, to the promise, to the children who had claimed him. It wasn't a mansion, nor a wedding, nor a promise made loud. It was a wooden table, 3 plates and 1 shawl, and the way the girls looked at him when they thought he wasn't watching. And maybe that's how homes are made, one small kindness at a time. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.